We've known for some time that access to mental health services in Canada is lagging way behind where it needs to be. The demand is greater than the supply, and even if you're able to find mental health support, the cost can be so high that help remains inaccessible for most of us. It's a massive issue with hundreds of systemic and practical causes that seem really daunting. All any of us can do to start to chip away at the problem is to take a first step. Today, we're going to meet a psychologist from BC who has taken a very, very long first step. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the communications person at the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is Mindful. The Tour de France this year takes 21 days and covers 3,406 kilometers in all. So imagine how difficult it would be to do two Tour de France's in just 40 days. That's what today's guest is doing as she cycles from BC to the Maritimes to raise awareness and money for kids' mental health.
My name's Alex DiGiacomo. I'm a clinical psychologist. I practice in Vancouver. I work with kids and families, mostly who are dealing with anxiety, trauma, behavioral stuff. And I'm currently in right outside Thunder Bay, Ontario, and I cycled here all the way from Vancouver, which is wild to me.
That is wild to me as well. And this is something that you're doing. You are undertaking a journey across Canada this summer. And I believe you're around the halfway point. I think you believe you're around the halfway point as we speak right now. I saw that you just passed through Kenora last time you posted on your Instagram. So Thunder Bay is quite a distance from there, I think, eh?
Oh, it certainly felt like quite a distance, Eric.
And you're doing it between like 100 and 200 kilometers a day. And you're somebody who really wasn't a cyclist before you started this journey. That, to me, I think is one of the fascinating things where you decided, I am not a cyclist. I haven't done this on the regular, but I can just get on a bike and go all the way across Canada. What made you think that that was something? Because I think, I'm thinking for myself, I don't think I could cycle 100 kilometers in a summer, let alone a day. So what made you decide this was the way to raise awareness for mental health issues, especially for children?
And I would have been with you on that, Eric. Like, honestly, last summer, cycling 100 kilometers would have seemed completely just not attainable. So why did I decide to do this? There are so many answers to that question. So big picture, the reason is one of my personal values is I think we do not have to have all of the answers to a complicated problem before we start moving in the direction of a solution. And for me, that applies in the context of accessible care for kids. We don't have to have all the answers to that before we start trying to chip away at it. And personally, I don't have to be an expert cyclist before I try doing this. The specific reason for the cycle across Canada, I was inspired by my best friend's dad, who cycled across the country when his wife passed away from breast cancer. So he's the one that gave me that specific idea of cycling. He did it in 1993, and we had a conversation. It's funny, I wrote it down in my journal just after Christmas of 2022. And then there was a couple months where I always wanted to do it. It was one of those things where as soon as I heard him say it, I knew I wanted to do it. I was personally sort of in need of a reset in my life. And this issue of accessibility had always been there in the background. I always knew I have to do something about this because it's like this elephant in the room, right? As psychologists, we love fixing things. I love solving problems, and I could very easily just ignore the fact that the vast majority of kids are not able to access the care that I can provide. So it'd be easy to just focus on the ones that I can see, but that just feels wrong, right? It doesn't feel very satisfying.
Right.
Those were some of the thoughts in the background. And I think for me, it was important to do something that was going to be very challenging, because I think a lot of life comes down to how we respond to uncertainty, right? And unfortunately, there are so many kids and parents in this country right now who are dealing with a lot of uncertainty because they can't access care and they feel alone. And so they feel like the task before them is insurmountable. So I wanted, as a metaphor, right? As some kind of metaphor analogy, I wanted to do something that felt insurmountable. And gosh, it sounds like a crazy idea. I'll just be honest. And my friends and family truly thought that I had lost it. But I have to say, halfway through, it has exceeded my expectations, honestly.
And so you're quite confident then that the second half will go quite well as well, and that you're going to be able to do this. Where is the end point? What's the finale that you're aiming for?
What I have in my route is St. John, New Brunswick. But as I've been writing, I've been realizing, that's not actually the end. So I'm going to do my very best to get to Halifax because then you can dip your tire, on the other side, coast to coast, really.
Oh,
But I'm going to have to speed up because I do have to be back at work, right, by a certain day. So right now it's New Brunswick, but we're going to see if I can get to Halifax. And when you say, am I confident? No, I'm not confident that I can. Absolutely not. Like, I believe I can, but the whole point here is like, I am not confident that I will make it through the next day. I don't know actually how it's been possible. I think it's just practice, and you can achieve more than you think. I think those are the two probably key things. Because certainly 3.5 months ago, the longest ride I'd been on was 65K, and I didn't actually own a bike at that time.
and so did you purchase a bike for this purpose?
Yes.
And was it, super souped up, like a tough bike that's going to be able to last through all of this? Is it one of those speed bikes that you see in the Tour de France? What kind of bike did you choose?
Yeah, it's funny. So I live about 2 blocks from a bike shop, and one day I walked right in there. It's called Reckless Bikes in Vancouver. I walked in and I said to the owner, like, I'm going to bike across Canada this summer. I need a bike. He said, I'm not a cyclist. He's like, okay, we'll get you a bike. So it's so funny because he had no problem with it. And that was, I think if he had a different reaction, I might have wavered more. But so he hooked me up with, gosh, I don't even know. I think it's a hybrid. It's more on it's a road bike with slightly wider tires. I'm not even a bike expert. I have no idea. It's a road bike with like slightly wider tires. And what else does it have on it? It has a radar for cars and trucks, so I can see when they come. That's all I know about my bike.
That's kind of perfect, right? This idea that you're just taking the leap and hopping on the bike that you got and going. In your practice, you've worked with children and kids. Yeah. Obviously, this is something we've all been dealing with for a long time, this issue of access and this issue that there's simply more demand than supply, especially of late. It's gotten worse. So how have you been dealing with that up until now? I mean, is it just something that you kind of see as a on the periphery of the practice that you're doing? Or is there something a little more tangible that you've seen specifically that brought that issue home for you?
I think it's probably that it's just been there for so long, right? Like I just remember at the beginning of grad school when, you work in the student clinics for like $20 an hour or whatever, the demand there was so high that waitlist was like a year. And now almost 12 years later, the waitlist at the private practice I work at is over a year. And then I remember seeing one kid come into my office and she said, I've been on your waitlist for 2 years. And it's just, I think it's easy for us to normalize it and think, oh yeah, like it's just hard to get in. But when you really think about it, it's just not okay, right? Like it's really not okay because especially with kids, we know that time is of the essence. Of course it is with adults too, but with kids, there's a developmental trajectory that we have to keep in mind. Right. So having anxiety that interferes with your functioning at age 5, if you don't get care until age 8, all of those developmental milestones between 5 and 8 are affected as well. So there's a compound effect. So yeah, having knowledge about this like super long wait list. And then even when kids get in, it's so expensive. So I work in private practice and it's not doable for most families. And yeah, so there wasn't one thing, I guess, but it's just the fact that this problem has been there for a very long time. It seems only to be getting worse. And I guess it just seems unfortunate because we do have treatments that really work. And so one of the themes when parents come in is they often feel like there's nothing that they can do for their kids or there's nothing that can be done. And often there really is a lot that can be done. So it seems so unfortunate to have these treatments that often really work and for kids not to be able to access them.
I can see what you're saying with kids, right? If there's a 2-year wait list to get somewhere and you finally do get in, well, now you need a different treatment than you did when you
Exactly.
first put yourself on that wait list and that kind of thing, right? And so you've chosen several charities to raise funds for as well that are dedicated to bringing mental health support to children. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of those charities?
Yeah, so that was something I wanted all of Canada to be represented. So I decided, yeah, to choose one from each province. And it's actually hard to choose them because there aren't, like in Saskatchewan, for example, it was hard. It was hard to find one. So that was interesting too, is like there are these gems, but you really have to search for them. So one of them is actually jack.org. This was a sort of an exception because they don't provide direct care to kids and families, but I think that the resourcing that they do is actually very innovative and very creative. So they equip young people to go to schools and to sort of do some preventative education and coaching to other young people. And we know that that is helpful for prevention and kind of normalizing of mental health. So, and they stand out to me because they're very strategic. They've scaled really well. They've done this in a very creative way. And so I really wanted to include them. And then there's Variety BC, Variety Manitoba, Casa Mental Health. There's all, in each province, there's a great charity that sees this gap and is trying to meet the needs in a really cool way.
Well, we will put links to each of those charities in the show notes of this podcast. So anyone listening now can go there and read all about the good work that's being done in your province and with all of the charities that Dr. Giacomo is riding for. And you've raised quite a lot of money so far. I think last I saw was over $10,000. What's the end goal? How much do you want to raise by the time this is all over?
It's funny. My goal was $10,000 and then I hit it about just under halfway. So right now it's actually at 14,200. And so one of the other kind of unintended consequences of this whole thing is that I've met some amazing people, like truly, truly incredible strangers. And so one of the strangers that I met actually offered me her house, her lake house to stay in Kenora. And I got to talking with her and she said, what are you doing? Like, you have to raise it to 50. She actually said you should raise it to 100. I mean, I didn't have the confidence to do that, but I did raise it to 50. So we're trying to raise $50,000.
That's terrific. And is that where you've been staying along the route? Are you staying with strangers? Do you just meet people in a town when you arrive there and say, hey, I need a place for the night? Or are you planning this a little more strategically? Do you book motels in advance? It looks like you're talking to me from a motel right now. I can't tell for sure, but
I am in a motel. So I wasn't completely reckless when planning this. So I do have a route and I have called it in advance for motels. Sometimes that's not possible. So I've just come out of a very remote stretch where there were like a couple cabins that were all sold out, but then they made an exception. So mostly I've been staying in motels. Some of them have heard about the initiative and have been very gracious and given it to me for free, which is like so appreciated. And then occasionally I've met some strangers who've offered their place and stayed there, but mostly motels.
And do you have a team going along with you? I see a few bags on the bed behind you there. It looks like a lot to carry on a bicycle. Is there someone following you in a car for safety purposes and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there's a support car and it meets me sort of every 40 kilometers or so. It's funny, initially on day 2. So day 2 was Agassiz to Merritt, which, if you're familiar with BC, goes along the Coquihalla Highway. You're not, but that was the day where I said to the support car, I said, you guys have to be beside me for a chunk of this because this is a very dangerous stretch of highway. Like, there's no shoulder at all. On one side, there's a cliff. On the other side, there's transport trucks just barreling by. So I wanted them to be right beside me. But then we got there and there's construction. So they couldn't because there's only one lane. And obviously you can't take up the lane. So I had to do that by myself, which was a nightmare. But basically, they thought that they'd be beside me a lot, but it turns out that's actually kind of dangerous because, like, cars aren't paying attention. And even though it's legal to have a follow car if there are 2 lanes, it's not a good idea. So we've kind of refined the technique, and so now we meet up, a few times in the riding day, and then they're there at the end of the night.
That sounds absolutely terrifying to me. Cycling along a road with no shoulder with a cliff on the one side and traffic on the other. Is that the scariest thing that's happened so far in the journey?
So to answer your question, yes, it was. And the interesting thing about it was right on day 2, which is right when I started. And so I hadn't really had time to process what I was doing because, to be honest with you, the preparation for this trip was the hardest part and mostly about calming everyone else down around me because everyone else was really scared. And so I didn't really have a chance to be scared, but then I got very, very scared on that day. So it was terrifying because it was only the second day on the road, and it like so luckily I actually saw these two cyclists on that highway. I don't know why or how they were there, but I just ran up to them and basically begged them to cycle with me, and they did. So I think honestly, I think if it weren't for having that chance meeting with these two people with all these bags, they were going to Calgary, I don't know that I would have made it past day 2, to be honest with you, because it was the worst day.
Yeah, that's just the heights alone freaks
Yeah.
me out. And just thinking about that freaks me out. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm glad you made it past that. I'm glad
Thank
that
you.
you're here. What day are you on now?
So I'm counting riding days. So I had this goal. I wanted to do it in 40 days of riding, and I am taking rest days. So today is a rest day, but I'm on day 23 of riding. So I'm about 4 days behind my goal. Like I'm gonna have to speed up if I want to hit the 40 days. If I don't, it's not the end of the world. It was a loose goal, but yeah, so mostly on track.
And what does speeding up mean? Does that mean taking fewer rest days, or does that mean just biking harder over the course of the day and getting further?
Yeah, so not taking fewer rest days because I'm not counting those in the like I wanted to do 40 days of riding. To speed up basically means to cover more mileage in a day. It's very like it's very surprising to me that I was able to do 200 in one day, which is kind of like ridiculous, right? Like who does that? But it was a day with tailwinds in the prairies, which, by the way, I'd never been to the prairies before, and I absolutely fell in love with Saskatchewan. It's just absolutely stunning. But when there's a tailwind, you can do anything, is what I
Yeah.
learned.
That
Yeah.
is amazing. That sounds incredible. 200 kilometers in a day. Saskatchewan is beautiful, right? All the fields with the different colors and all that kind of thing. But I will say, whenever I've driven through the prairies, Saskatchewan in particular, and large stretches of Manitoba, I find it difficult to stay awake driving the car because it's so straight and there's very little to, as far as landmarks go, to pay attention to along the side of the road. Like, oh, there's a beautiful blue field and a beautiful yellow mustard field or whatever. But do you find the same thing on the bike? Does it get monotonous, or is it just so beautiful all the time that you're totally happy and wide awake paying attention to all of it?
I had a wildly different experience each of the 4 days I was there. So one of them, there's actually a video of me. I didn't post it, but I'm pretty much crying, basically saying exactly what you said. Like, I feel like I'm on a treadmill and nothing ever moves. Like the scenery is beautiful, but it's static. Like it's not, it doesn't really change. So there was one day that was rough. Although even by the end of that day, I seemed to come out of that slump somehow. But the other ones, gosh, I don't know. There was something about the contrast in scenery from the mountains to the prairies that it really was a great context for like my own kind of processing and reflecting and contemplating. So I'm not a naturally very contemplative person, but I see the value in it. And so it's like it almost took that environment to force me to do some reflecting. And to be honest, I found it pretty magical. There was almost like a trance-like state to it. And I think that the environment contributed to that. So mostly my memories from there are I was pleasantly surprised, and I felt like the prayers were just so alive.
I can't imagine not being forced into a contemplative state given the long days of cycling. And I mean, it strikes me that you spend an awful lot of time alone with your own mind in that circumstance. I once ran a half marathon. So
Wow.
And no, not wow. It was terrible. I absolutely hated every minute of it. And these people who are runners, right? Like distance runners and the people who love that stuff were telling me, oh, you're going to get out there and like, you're going to get a few kilometers in and you're going to get this runner's high and it's going to feel amazing. Like you're running on air and then and I ran a full half marathon without once experiencing that in any way. Every step of it sucked. I have sworn off running for the rest of my life after I got the little badge thing and I said, that's enough, no more, right? But it sounds like you're describing this sort of runner's high in a way when you're gliding through the prairies and appreciating everything around you.
Eric, I have to say, there's no other way I could. There were a couple days in particular there that were just euphoric, and I thought, like, man, what is happening to me? And like, I don't know how to explain it. I really don't. But yeah, maybe cyclist high, all the fresh air. I don't know and there's no other way that I would have been able to do 200 kilometers, and I wasn't even going slow. Like my average speed was 27 kilometers an hour. So it's just baffling. It's really like, and I think that relates to just one of the big picture lessons I've taken away from this. So like in my practice, obviously I treat a lot of anxiety. So I'm all about facing fears as a way to treat anxiety. And usually the benefit of that is like, okay, your functioning is impaired. You're not able to do quote unquote regular things because of your anxiety. So let's face those fears so that you can function normally. What I'm not as familiar with is this idea that there's like freedom on the other side of fear. So not only can it get you to baseline, but it's like a portal to joy, really. So for me personally, it's been quite the experience. And because I'm scared, like I'm very scared of the trucks and the cars and oh my goodness, the crosswinds. Geez, like that's the worst. But on the other side of that, I would say it's been euphoric, honestly.
That's really cool. Do you think it's going to change the way you approach your practice when you do finally go back?
Yes, because it's funny when you can say, and I can't say this just yet, but if you can say that you've propelled yourself across the country with your legs, like it really emboldens you. It really does. It makes you feel kind of dangerous. So I am definitely going to change my practice. I don't know how, but I'm going to change it in a way, hopefully, that will make it more accessible. Yeah, it turns out that like my initial inclination of you don't have to wait till you have all the answers to move in the direction of a solution is true. And you can count on a snowball effect. You can count on momentum building, and you can count on confidence increasing. So yes, my practice will change. I don't know how, but it will change.
Well, I think that's kind of the best advice. And maybe I think the thing I hope people take out of this whole thing is just take that first step, right? That there's huge problems with massive systemic issues and all kinds of difficulties to address. But until everyone takes that first little step, or in your case, massive 6,000 kilometer step, then, it's not going to get changed. So that's a great way to approach it. And was that the approach right from the beginning, or is that something that you sort of come to over the course of the journey?
When you have some kind of loose conviction and you decide to trust it and then it materializes, that's kind of what it was. Like part of this we know from decades of psychological research. Like we know that taking an action step has a way of galvanizing hope. And it's all about uncertainty. It's all about how you deal with uncertainty. And if I could make a generalization, I don't know if this is fair, but it feels kind of like sometimes as psychologists, we tend towards the more like risk averse side. And I include myself in that too. So what I'm used to is thinking a lot about things before I do them. And so I have a value of taking a step in uncertainty. I don't know that I've really practiced that. So this is the first major time that I've done that. And it really does have a way of galvanizing hope and building momentum. So I think you're right when you say that. Like it's more valuable than I thought to take a step before you have all the answers.
And so tell me a little bit about your practice as it stands now. You're helping children. You're dealing primarily, you said, with anxiety and that sort of thing in a private practice. how many children are you able to see in a given, week or month? I think that's something a lot of people want to know when we talk about access. How many children are being left out and how long these wait lists are really depends on the capacity of individual psychologists, mental health professionals, psychotherapists to accommodate, right?
Yeah, I'm an associate in a private practice. I work there 2 days a week. I recently finished a postdoctoral fellowship at BC Children's Hospital. So I um yeah, so I get actually even while I was doing that, I was 2 days. So in 2 days, I do see a lot of kids. I try to just pack them in, honestly. I see probably about 8 a day, so 16 a week. But that's not a lot, like and then I usually, I don't know, probably the average would be 12 to 15 sessions for each one. So
Right.
you can do the math on that, but there's not a lot of availability. So, yeah, like I think probably part of the answer to the accessibility problem is figuring out a different model because the one-to-one, like it just doesn't leave a lot of room for new cases. But then even if it does, there's the financial part of it. So
Right, right. And that becomes a big thing as well. And, one of the things we advocate for a lot is health plans and insurance companies covering a certain amount of that. But then again, the demand is still greater than the supply, even if all private insurance covered that, even if all workplace insurance did. One of the pillars that you're cycling for here that you've laid out is psychoeducation. First of all, explain what psychoeducation means and what you're hoping people learn about it.
well, you've very carefully read my initiative. I really appreciate that, Eric. So psychoeducation is actually really important. It's basically knowledge about psychology, knowledge about mental health symptoms, and how, like for example, how anxiety is impacted by the body and the brain, and kind of how it works. And the reason it's especially important when it comes to treating mental health problems is because the knowledge itself actually matters. So what we know is simply having access to good psychoeducation can in and of itself make people feel better. So even before you've done any actual treatment. So that's why and it's like I'm new to the whole social media world, but I think that that context lends itself very well to psychoeducation because it's not therapy, right? Obviously, you can't do therapy on social media, but you can provide knowledge, and psychoeducation is basically a key ingredient in many of the therapies that we know work. So, like one example is, what do you do with fear? Like when you avoid things, they get bigger. When you face things, they get smaller. So little bits of that. And so I'm hoping that that's like an easy kind of free way to help people feel less alone while they're waiting. So I've kind of tagged it #LearnWhileYouWait. And I haven't shared actually as much psychoeducation as I've wanted because it's been so busy, but I have like 20 videos saved up that I'll hopefully start sharing in the next few days.
So you have pre-recorded a bunch of videos that you can then upload along your journey. I was wondering if you were taking a stop at every time that you stopped for the evening that you were posting to Instagram, live, but it's much easier if you record some things ahead of time, I imagine.
I've recorded ahead of time, but I am recording on the bike a lot because I have a phone stand, which just happened to work out so well. So I can just talk. And because it's so interesting how many relevant analogies come up when you are on the road. Like it's wild, the metaphors for mental health and cycling. Like for example, the other day, there was one day where I was facing this crazy headwind. I was barely moving. And then the next day I had a tailwind and I was just coasting, at 38 kilometers an hour. And like the point there, it's just so obvious, right? Like I was not any fitter the second day. I didn't have any additional mental fortitude the second day. The only thing that was different was the winds blowing in a different direction. So that for me was a metaphor of like, okay, not all of this is up to us. So a lot of the times when we're experiencing these mental health problems and symptoms, it has a lot to do with our environment and our circumstance. And we all need a little bit of help, but some of us don't ever get any help. Like some of us never get to experience what it's like to have a tailwind. So that's, I guess it's not technically psychoeducation, but a little bit it is, because if somebody is hearing that and they've just been struggling chronically for decades because they're, have issues with homelessness or whatever, they can at least know like it's not their fault. Like there's a lot of this that is about our environment.
It's an excellent metaphor. Whether it counts as psychoeducation or not, I think that it's something that people can really identify with, and watching you go through it can be nothing if not helpful, I imagine. So you're a neophyte when it comes to cycling and to social media. You're combining the two things. You're chronicling this whole journey on Instagram. How have you found that experience, starting this Instagram account and going through this journey with the people who are following you, commenting, responding to the content that you're putting out there?
Yeah, I would say that's been tougher than the cycling. Not more difficult, but just it feels much more vulnerable. Like as a psychologist on social media, it's just not ever something that I thought I would be doing. Like I never thought I would be putting myself out there online. And it feels very vulnerable. And I'm constantly thinking about like, okay, is what I'm putting out there like actually going to be helpful to anybody? Like, is it possible that it's going to be harm? So there's just a lot of thought that goes into it and takes a lot of time. But I would say overall, it's been worth it. And I think that psychologists should be online because there are so many people saying things online that are actually harmful, especially when it comes to mental health. So I think it's important to have, some kind of like qualified voices out there combating some of like the other day on TikTok, I saw someone say, ADHD is a trauma response. And so I thought like, gosh, we got to be on here because that's not true. Obviously, that's not true. So
Right.
There's got to be someone countering it.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a pile of noise in the social media space, and especially around mental health, an awful lot of terrible advice and a lot of things, like you said, that just aren't true. And yes, the more qualified people we have in those spaces who can either debunk some of the untrue things or just put out some quality content that people can gravitate toward, and maybe in the end that's one of the lasting legacies of what you're doing. You're going to have this page with a lot of really great content and a lot of really great metaphors from cycling across Canada, and over the course of 6,000 kilometers you're going to have a lot of thoughts along the way, and sharing them from the road is a great way to do that.
Well, thank you.
So you've got, you're just past halfway. I've looked it up since we started talking. You are, in fact, past the halfway mark, at least on the Trans-Canada. I don't know where the Trans-Canada actually ends, but you are past the halfway mark of Canada.
Does that include my detour to Toronto? Please tell me it does.
I don't know. That I would have to look up a little more carefully on MapQuest, or I shouldn't say MapQuest. I don't think people use that anymore. That shows how old I am and how unfamiliar with all this technology I am as well. But Google Maps might be able to tell me a little better. But I don't want to take time away from the interview to go do that. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll let people know whether Thunder Bay is halfway with a detour to Toronto. So do you have anything special planned for Toronto? What's prompted that detour?
So it's my hometown. And, when I was first planning this, I think we've discussed how this whole thing was not meticulously planned, right? Like it was, but it all came together at the last minute. So I just thought, okay, I'm going to beeline it, right? I'm going to take the shortest, like the quickest route. But then I realized, oh, it's actually a big deal. Like I actually made it, I actually got myself here. And so then I thought, maybe I should go to my hometown, because I think I am planning a little event. So it'll be a public event in a park on September 2nd in Toronto. And I'm hoping that I'll find some folks to ride into the park with me, maybe from Collingwood. So yeah, we'll have, and now that I have $40,000 more to raise, I'm going to need all of the extra voices that I can get.
Well, terrific. We will share the story when you reach Toronto, and please let us know how that goes. And in the show notes here, we'll help you as best we can reach that $50,000 goal by putting all the charities that you're supporting in the show notes and your Instagram as well. For people who are not yet following along, it's very much worth a follow, and we can track your progress as you go. It's been terrific.
That's very sweet of you to say. I appreciate it. And I should also say there is one donation link. It's charitable impact. And then at the end of the ride, the funds get split across all the charities. So you could, of course, read about all the amazing charities, but the donation link is one kind of link, and then it all gets split.
All right. Oh, so people in individual provinces aren't donating to the organization in their province. They're donating to the whole cause, and then it will go. Okay.
Because there's no other way to tally it up, so that I had to find an organization where you could kind of hold the money, and then at the end you can split it across all of the charities that you want for it to go to.
Terrific. And one last question before I let you go. The overall goal of this, what do you hope people take away from this? People who are following along with it, people who are just hearing about it now, people who are inclined to support it. What do you hope that people take away from this more than anything else?
I think if I had to sum it up briefly, I want people to know that kids matter and parents really matter. Like they're worth fighting for, that there are tons of kids and parents across this country who are feeling very, very alone, not because of their mental health struggles, but because they're alone in their mental health struggles. So it's not even the symptoms themselves that are the primary problem. The primary problem is that they're not able to access care. So I want people to know that. I want the people suffering to know that they're not alone. And I want there to be some kind of momentum building to, in the direction of a solution.
Excellent. Well, I hope that we are moving toward that solution in one way or the other, and advocating for it is the first step, and you have taken an enormous first step in that pursuit. So very nice. Well done. Congratulations on being past halfway, and we'll follow the rest of your journey with great interest.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm so glad you got in touch.
Go to the show notes of today's episode for a link to donate to Dr. DiGiacomo's cause, and for links to follow her journey on Instagram. The donation link contains further links for the charities she's supporting, and it's incomplete at the moment because as she enters each new province, a new charity gets added to the list. Thanks to Dr. DiGiacomo for taking the time on her rest day to speak with me, and to you at home for listening, streaming, or downloading today's episode. Mindful is written, hosted, and published by me, Eric Bullman. Our producer is Jamie Montgomery, and our theme song is Avenues by David Taylor.